Stop overpaying for the same overhyped SUV names everyone else chases. The best cheap SUVs are not always the clean ones parked up front with the famous badge. Sometimes they are the dead brand crossovers, the weird boxes, the rental stigma family haulers, and the forgotten trucks nobody wants to brag about. That is where the value hides. But here is the catch. Forgotten does not automatically mean good. Some SUVs are cheap because buyers are scared of the badge. Others are cheap because the inspection is about to punish you. A dead badge can be harmless. Weird styling can be harmless. Rental image can be harmless. A plain interior can be harmless. Rust, overheating, slipping transmissions, bad all-wheel drive systems, missing timing belt proof, and warning lights are not harmless. Today, we are checking 12 ignored SUVs with real prices, inspection warnings, and maintenance tips. The goal is not to buy the prettiest SUV. The goal is to find the one the market misunderstood, then verify the hardware before you spend. And number one is the ugly Honda box that buyers mocked until prices climbed. Let's get into it. Number 12. Pontiac Torrent V6. The Pontiac Torrent has one problem before you even open the hood. The badge is dead. A lot of buyers see Pontiac and assume parts are impossible, support is gone, and the SUV is automatically a mistake. That fear can push prices down. But fear and facts are not the same thing. We are looking at 2006 to 2009 Torrent base, or GT models with the 3.4-liter V6, not rough overheated examples, and not the GXP story because that uses different hardware and higher repair risk. The regular Torrent used a 3.4-liter V6 with about 185 horsepower, 210 pound-feet of torque, and a 5-speed automatic. It is not quick, modern, or fancy, but it is. Familiar GM hardware and familiar matters when you are paying used SUV money. I have seen this kind of mistake happen with dead badges. A buyer sees the name, assumes parts are a nightmare, and walks away before asking the better question. Is the engine, transmission, cooling system, and rust story clean? That is where a cheap Torrent can start to make sense. The image problem is obvious. Pontiac is gone, the shape looks plain, and some buyers think parts are impossible. That is usually wrong. It shares plenty of repair logic with the early Equinox family, so brakes, suspension parts, cooling parts, sensors, wheel bearings, and common service items are not some museum hunt. Street reality, expect tired plastics, cloudy headlights, worn seats, and a cabin that feels cheaper than a Toyota. Fine, that is not the decision. The decision is whether the mechanical story is boring. Prices usually sit around $2,500 to $7,000, depending on miles, rust, and condition. That is the value window. The market discounts the badge, but you still have to inspect like an adult. The inspection starts with coolant. Check for intake gasket seepage, temperature creep, sweet smells, rusty coolant, slipping shifts, front-end clunks, wheel bearing growl, electrical accessories, and underbody rust. Drive it fully warm, because a short test drive hides cooling and transmission problems. This is for someone who wants a cheap, usable SUV that local shops can understand and is willing to inspect cooling and rust carefully. Skip it if the seller cannot explain coolant history, transmission service, or why the temperature gauge moves funny. Maintenance tip? Keep coolant fresh and fix seepage early. The cheap Pontiac plan dies fast when heat, neglect, and low coolant enter the story. A good Torrent is not a dream SUV. It is cheap, usable, and familiar enough for local shops to understand. But the next SUV is even more boring, and boring is exactly why shops still understand it. If this straight forgotten SUV talk helps you, subscribe. We show reliable cheap finds, costly traps, and simple checks before you waste money. Number 11. Ford Escape. 2.3, 2005 to 2008. The Ford Escape 2.3 has the kind of problem that can actually help a buyer. It is boring, it looks old. The interior is cheap. The Ford badge does not get Toyota respect. Some examples look like retired fleet duty. That means plenty of shoppers walk right past the simple version and chase something flashier. But when you are buying a cheap SUV, simple can be the whole point. The Ford Escape 2.3 from 2005 to 2008 is the one I would rather inspect than the flashier V6 when a buyer wants cheap, steady transportation. Look for XLS or lower trim 4-cylinder models, especially front-wheel drive examples, because less hardware means fewer old parts waiting to complain. The 2.3-liter inline-4 made about 153 horsepower and 152 pound-feet of torque, with manual or automatic availability depending on trim. Nobody buys this because it looks exciting. They skip it because the interior is cheap, the body shape is old, the Ford badge does not get Toyota respect, and some examples look like retired fleet duty. That stigma creates the opening. The 2.3 is lighter on front-end parts, easier to service, and less thirsty than the V6. No turbo, no direct injection headache, no luxury suspension, no giant screen-locking basic repairs behind dealer software. Prices usually run $3,000 to $7,000, with rough private party cars lower and clean retail examples higher. The repair logic is simple. This is not a complicated SUV. It is a basic crossover where rust, fluid neglect, suspension looseness, and transmission behavior matter more than image. Street reality: expect cloth wear, paint fade, rattles, and a ride that feels more honest than refined. What you cannot accept is heavy rust, overheating, harsh transmission behavior, or suspension looseness that makes it wander. Inspect rocker panels, rear wheel arches, subframe areas, transmission shifts, suspension clunks, air conditioning, rear hatch function, motor mounts, and tire wear. If it is all-wheel drive, check rear driveline noise and make sure matching tires are installed. This is for someone who wants simple, cheap transportation and does not need the flashier V6 story. Skip it if you find heavy rust, mismatched tires on all-wheel drive, mystery wiring, lift kits, or harsh shifts. Maintenance tip: service coolant and transmission fluid early. Cheap Escapes usually die from neglect, corrosion, and ignored fluids, not because the basic layout is impossible. A plain key, factory wheels, and old receipts are better than a shiny detail job. But the next one has a forgotten Mitsubishi badge and more power than shoppers expect. Number 10. Mitsubishi Outlander V6, 2007 to 2009. The Mitsubishi Outlander V6 gets ignored for a reason that has more to do with the badge than the hardware. Buyers chase CR-V and RAV4 first. Mitsubishi resale is weak. The styling is odd. Some shoppers hear the badge and assume trouble. That is where a useful SUV can slip through. We are looking at 2007 to 2009 LS or XLS models with a 3-liter V6, clean service records, and no cheap off-road fantasy story. The 3-liter V6 made about 220 horsepower and 204 pound-feet of torque. Paired with a 6-speed automatic, with front-wheel drive or available all-wheel drive depending on trim, that is stronger than many people expect from a Mitsubishi crossover nobody talks about anymore. This is the buyer mistake. They compare the badge to Honda and Toyota, then stop thinking. But the better question is whether the timing service, transmission, all-wheel drive system, cooling condition, rust, and owner history check out. The hardware is not some delicate luxury experiment. It is a naturally aspirated V6 crossover with useful space, normal service needs, and enough power for highway merging, family trips, and bad weather duty if equipped correctly. Prices usually land around $4,500 to $9,000, depending on mileage, rust, trim, and drivetrain. That is the price shock. You may get V6 power and real family usefulness for less because the market is chasing more famous Japanese names. Street reality: it may feel noisy, dated, and less polished than a Honda. That is the discount. Check timing belt history if applicable. Warm transmission shifts, rear differential noise, all-wheel drive function, suspension clunks, rust, electrical accessories, cooling condition, and tire matching. Also check whether the third row, if equipped, folds cleanly, and whether the rear hatch seals stay dry. These SUVs often lived family lives, so cargo stains are normal, but standing water, mildew, and electrical weirdness are costly clues. This is for someone who wants useful space, more power than expected, and is willing to inspect the service story closely. Skip it if you see mystery warning lights, neglected timing service, bad all-wheel drive behavior, or a seller trying to rush you because the price is tempting. Maintenance tip: do the timing service on schedule and keep the transmission fluid fresh. A neglected Outlander turns expensive because owners forget it needs real service, not because the badge is cursed. If it passes, you get a weird bargain with real power and useful space. If it fails, do not rescue it out of pity. But the next Chevy gets blamed for a later generation problem, and that is where careful buyers can separate reputation from reality. Number 9. Chevy Equinox 3.4 V6 2005 to 2009. The older Chevy Equinox has a reputation problem that comes from the wrong story. A lot of buyers hear Equinox and think of the later 2.4 oil-burning complaints. But that is not the SUV we are talking about here. We are talking about the 2005 to 2009 Equinox LS or LT with the 3.4-liter V6 and 5-speed automatic. That older 3.4 made about 185 horsepower and around 210 pound-feet of torque, so nobody should pretend it is fast, modern, or exciting. The point is familiarity. This is a basic GM crossover with parts local shops understand, not a tiny turbo SUV with mystery codes and dealer-only drama. I have seen buyers reject older Equinox models because the name reminds them of later problems. That can be smart if they are avoiding the wrong car, but it can also make them miss the older V6 story entirely. The image problem is real. The Equinox name got dragged through later four-cylinder oil complaints, rental lot memories, cheap interiors, and the kind of plastic cabin nobody brags about at work. That hurts the old V6 models too, which is good for buyers who inspect instead of assuming. Pick LS or LT, trims with records. Do not pay extra because it has leather, a sunroof, shiny wheels, or a seller who says it is loaded. Loaded does not matter if the coolant is low and the transmission shifts like a tired mule. Prices usually sit around $3,000 to $7,500, depending on mileage, rust, and maintenance. The repair cost logic is simple. Local shops know this kind of GM hardware, but cooling problems and transmission issues can erase the bargain fast. The inspection starts with the cooling system. Check coolant level, coolant smell, intake gasket seepage, temperature behavior, transmission shift feel, wheel bearing growl, front control arms, rear hatch function, and every electrical switch. Let it idle fully warm with the air conditioning on, because heat problems like to hide during short test drives. Look underneath for rust around brake lines, suspension mounts, and rocker areas. Street reality: this SUV will feel old. Expect cabin rattles, faded trim, scratched cargo plastic, and maybe seats that look like kids lived in them. That is acceptable. A slipping transmission, coolant loss, or temperature creep is not. This is for someone who wants a cheap, familiar GM SUV and knows the cooling system is the deal maker or deal breaker. Skip it if the seller says it has always used a little coolant. Treat that as a warning, not comfort. Maintenance tip: flush coolant correctly, keep the radiator and hoses healthy, and do not ignore even a small temperature change. Heat kills the cheap GM SUV plan. A clean, older Equinox is not glamorous, but it can be cheaper, useful, and simple enough to keep running. But the next SUV is a dead brand off-road sleeper, where parts require patience, not panic. Number 8. Suzuki Grand Vitara V6, 2006 to 2009. The Suzuki Grand Vitara has the kind of badge fear that scares casual buyers away. Suzuki left the American car market. The styling looks dated. People assume parts are impossible. That fear makes some buyers walk past SUVs that still have rugged bones underneath. The Grand Vitara V6 from 2006 to 2009 is not a soft little mall crossover pretending to be tough. The clean target is a V6 model, especially four-wheel drive examples with service history, matching tires, and no rusty trail abuse story. The 2.7-liter V6 made about 185 horsepower and around 184 pound-feet of torque, with manual or automatic choices depending on setup. Properly equipped four-wheel drive versions brought real low-range capability. And that is the whole reason this Suzuki belongs here. The buyer mistake is panic. Dealer support is not Toyota level, but basic parts still exist through aftermarket suppliers and online channels. The truth is not panic. The truth is patience. The hardware survives because it is naturally aspirated, mechanically honest, and more rugged than many car-based crossovers that cost more. Prices usually run $4,000 to $9,000, with clean four-wheel drive examples higher. That price can make sense if the driveline and rust story are clean. It does not make sense if the SUV was abused off-road and neglected underneath. Inspection matters more than the badge. Check front differential noise, transfer case operation, wheel bearings, rust, cooling system health, air conditioning, suspension bushings, drive shaft vibration, and tire matching. Take it through slow turns, listen for binding, and test four-wheel drive modes where it is safe. A real four-wheel drive system is only an advantage when the owner services it. Street reality. Expect louder road noise, older plastics, average fuel economy, and maybe small parts that take longer to source. That is part of the deal. What you cannot accept is a neglected driveline, rusted underbody, overheating, or missing service records. This is for someone who lives with snow, dirt roads, rough weather, or needs more real capability than a soft crossover. Skip it if you want Toyota-level parts convenience, hate waiting for parts, or refuse to check driveline fluids. Maintenance tip: service the transfer case and differential fluids instead of only changing engine oil. Four-wheel drive systems fail faster when owners act like the rear end does not exist. Keep tires matched in size and wear, because mismatched rubber can create expensive driveline stress. If you need a forgotten SUV with real four-wheel drive usefulness, this Suzuki can be a smarter tool than a prettier crossover. But the next SUV shares Ford bones, Mazda badging, and just enough weirdness to stay cheap. Number 7. Mazda Tribute V6, 2003 to 2006. The Mazda Tribute is the kind of SUV people forget existed. That is part of the value. Platform cousins can be boring, but boring is exactly what keeps repair bills from getting dramatic. The Mazda Tribute V6 from 2003 to 2006 is basically tied to the Ford Escape family, but the Mazda badge keeps it quieter in the used market. Look for ES or similar V6 trims with clean service history, no heavy rust, and no neglected all-wheel drive problems. The 3-liter V6 made around 200 horsepower and came with a 4-speed automatic. That sounds old now, because it is old. But old also means simple parts, familiar problems, and a local shop that does not need a conference call to diagnose it. Some buyers do not even remember Mazda sold this SUV. Others see it as a Ford in a different shirt and move on. That low demand helps prices stay around $3,500 to $8,000. The hardware survives because it shares repair logic with Escape models, which means brakes, suspension, sensors, cooling parts, and common drivetrain pieces are usually not strange. It is not a premium SUV. It is a cheap family box with a usable V6 and decent parts support. The inspection is where you protect yourself. Inspect transmission shifts carefully, especially when warm. Old 4-speed automatics can feel acceptable cold and tired after 10 miles. Check rust, rear differential noise on all-wheel drive models, valve cover leaks, suspension clunks, wheel bearing hum, air conditioning, rear hatch struts, motor mounts, and tire wear. Also look for mismatched tires on all-wheel drive examples, because that tells you the owner may have been cheap in the wrong places. Street reality. The Tribute may feel dated, noisy, and soft in the suspension. That is not failure. Failure is slipping shifts, burnt fluid smell, coolant loss, deep rust, or a rear driveline that howls. This is for someone who wants a cheap family SUV with familiar Ford family repair logic. Skip it if the transmission acts tired when warm, the all-wheel drive tires do not match, or the rust is already winning. Maintenance tip? Change transmission fluid before it feels tired. Waiting until the shifts get harsh is how cheap SUVs become costly scrap. Keep the cooling system healthy too, because old V6 crossovers do not forgive overheating. A good Tribute is not exciting, but it can do errands, winter duty, school runs, and weekend hauling without newer SUV payments. But the next dead brand SUV hides a Honda V6, and that changes the conversation. Number 6. Saturn Vue V6, Redline Adjacent Trim, 2004 to 2007. The Saturn Vue has a badge problem. Saturn is gone. The plastic panel body looks old. A lot of buyers do not trust anything with that badge anymore. But this is where the V6 model becomes interesting. The Saturn Vue V6 from 2004 to 2007, especially Redline or clean V6 trims near that look, is worth attention because the heart of the thing is not ordinary Saturn hardware. The V6 model used a 3.5-liter V6 with a 5-speed automatic, making about 250 horsepower and about 242 pound-feet of torque, with towing around 3,500 pounds when properly equipped. That is strong power for a forgotten compact SUV. The Honda-sourced V6 angle changes the conversation. It gives the Vue real highway confidence and a drivetrain story that feels more serious than the badge suggests. I have seen buyers dismiss dead brand SUVs too fast. With the Vue V6, the smarter move is not to laugh at the Saturn badge. It is to ask for timing belt proof, transmission behavior, and records. Prices usually run $3,000 to $7,000, with nice V6 examples often around $4,000 to $5,000 depending on the region. That price can be tempting, but do not buy the cheapest one just because the engine story sounds good. Inspect transmission shift quality, timing belt proof, motor mounts, front suspension, rear differential, if all-wheel drive, rust underneath, cooling system, and every electrical accessory. Timing belt proof matters because you should treat this like a Honda V6, not like a disposable beater. Also, check tires, brakes, and engine mounts because extra power in a cheap SUV often means owners drove it harder than they admit. Street reality: the interior will not feel plush. The plastics may squeak, and the styling may look like a time capsule from a closed dealership. Fine. What matters is whether it starts clean, shifts smoothly, tracks straight, and has records. This is for someone who wants cheap SUV usefulness with stronger power than the badge suggests. Skip it if the seller cannot prove timing belt history, if the transmission shifts badly, or if the Redline look is being used to distract from missing maintenance. Maintenance tip? Do the timing belt service on time and keep the transmission fluid fresh. If the seller cannot prove the belt's history, budget it immediately or walk. The right Vue V6 is quicker, cheaper, and more useful than people expect, but a neglected one can turn into a parts bin headache fast. But the next SUV is Korean, cheap because of badge memory, and better than old opinions make it sound. Subscribe if you want smarter used SUV picks without dealership smoke. We compare badges, engines, rust, and repair costs before you buy. Number 5. Hyundai Santa Fe, 3.3 V6, 2007 to 2009. The Hyundai Santa Fe 3.3 V6 gets punished by old opinions. Some buyers still judge Hyundai like it is stuck in the bad old days. That can keep prices down long after the vehicle itself improved. The Santa Fe 3.3 V6 from 2007 to 2009 is the kind of SUV many buyers skip because they chase Toyota or Honda first. We are looking at SE or limited trims with clean private owner history, normal tires, and service records that do not look invented. The 3.3-liter V6 made about 242 horsepower and 226 pound-feet of torque, paired with a 5-speed automatic. That gives it real highway confidence, decent family space, and a calmer ownership story than many later turbo or dual-clutch crossovers. This is the buyer mistake. They remember old Hyundai jokes and stop there. But a smarter buyer checks the actual engine, transmission, cooling, rust, tires, and records. The image problem is plain styling. Old Hyundai reputation. and the fact that buyers chase Toyota or Honda first. That creates a value pocket. Prices usually run $4,500 to $9,000, with clean limited trims higher. The hardware survives because it is naturally aspirated, reasonably accessible, and not trying to squeeze big power from a tiny boosted engine. Inspect oil leaks, cooling condition, suspension clunks, warm transmission shifts, all-wheel drive function if equipped, rear hatch operation, rust, and tire wear. Timing service details vary by exact engine and year, so service records matter. Do not accept vague answers. Street reality. Expect aging interior plastics, worn leather on limited trims, tired struts, and maybe electronics that feel dated. None of that kills the deal. Harsh shifts, coolant smell, oil leaks, or a noisy driveline can. This is for someone who wants usable V6 family space without paying Toyota or Honda money. Skip it if the service records are vague, the transmission shifts harshly, the cooling system smells wrong, or the seller used cheap tires and ignored the rest. Maintenance tip: stay ahead of coolant, oil, and transmission fluid. Hyundai value disappears fast when basic fluids are ignored. A clean Santa Fe is not a status SUV, but it can be useful, stable, and cheaper than a comparable Toyota if you inspect it hard. But the next one is another Ford family SUV, and the Mercury badge keeps shoppers away before they realize what it shares underneath. Number 4. Mercury Mariner 2.3 or 3.0, 2005 to 2008. The Mercury Mariner has one advantage most buyers ignore. Nobody is fighting you for it. Forgotten Mercury badges can turn ordinary Ford hardware into a quieter bargain. The Mariner from 2005 to 2008 is basically the more dressed-up cousin of the Escape, and that is exactly why it deserves a look. For low-cost ownership, the 2.3-liter four-cylinder is the cleaner play. It is slower, but it keeps the front end lighter and the repairs simpler. The 3-liter V6 gives more power, but it needs a harder inspection because old V6 crossovers can hide leaks, tired transmissions, and suspension wear. The image problem is that Mercury is gone. The body shape is old, and most shoppers forget this SUV ever existed. That is not a bad thing. Escape platform support means brakes, suspension, cooling parts, sensors, and basic service items are familiar to shops. Prices usually land around $3,500 to $8,000. That is the value pocket. It is not special because it is luxurious. It is special because it is familiar underneath and overlooked on the lot. Inspect rust first, especially rockers, rear wheel arches, brake lines, and subframe areas. Then check transmission shift feel, wheel bearings, front suspension, rear hatch, air conditioning, power windows, and all-wheel drive behavior if equipped. Also make sure every interior feature works, because premium trim means nothing when switches are broken and parts are annoying to chase. Street reality: the Mariner feels old in the same way the Escape feels old, just with more trim pieces and softer marketing. Expect faded wood look panels, worn seats, and dated controls. What you want is an honest, dry, smooth-running SUV with records. What you avoid is a shiny one with rust underneath and a transmission that bangs into gear. This is for someone who wants Escape family repair logic with less shopping competition. Skip it if rust, bad shifts, broken premium features, or neglected all-wheel drive parts are already showing. Maintenance tip: if it is all-wheel drive, service the rear differential and power transfer unit. Do not treat it like a front-wheel drive sedan. Keep coolant and transmission fluid fresh too, because cheap Ford family SUVs become expensive when fluids get ignored. A good Mariner is not special because it is luxurious. It is special because nobody is fighting you for it. But the next SUV is not forgotten. The base version gets ignored, while buyers overpay for flashier trims. Number 3. Toyota RAV4 Base, 2006 to 2012. The Toyota RAV4 has the opposite problem from most SUVs on this list. The badge is not forgotten. The badge is powerful, and that can make buyers careless. Plain Toyota trims get ignored when buyers chase options, and that is where the base RAV4 becomes useful. We are talking about 2006 to 2012 RAV4 base models with the 4-cylinder. especially 2009 to 2012 when possible. The earlier 2.4-liter cars can work, but they need stricter oil consumption checks. The 2006 and 2007 base four-cylinder made about 166 horsepower and commonly used a 4-speed automatic in the American market. That is not fancy. It is simple Toyota crossover hardware with a huge parts network, easy service familiarity, and real daily usefulness. The image problem is not dead badge stigma. The image problem is that base trims look dull. Low features, plain wheels, basic cabins, and no V6 bragging rights make buyers skip them. Good. Base models often avoid the kind of luxury aging that turns cheap SUVs into electrical projects. Prices usually run $6,000 to $12,000, with clean later examples higher. That price is higher than many SUVs here, but it can still make sense because the base model may do the same job with less drama than flashier trims. Inspection matters because the Toyota badge can make buyers stupid. Check oil level, oil consumption history, drivetrain hum, steering clunks, leaks, rear differential noise on all-wheel drive models, rust, suspension wear, and tire matching. On 2.4 examples, ask how often the oil was checked between changes. If the seller looks confused, be careful. A Toyota that runs low on oil is not a reliable Toyota anymore. Street reality, a base RAV4 may have cloth wear, road noise, simple controls, and less power than buyers expect. That is fine. It should still start clean, track straight, shift smooth, and stay dry underneath. This is for someone who wants Toyota parts support and daily usefulness without paying extra for aging luxury features. Skip it if oil use is unclear, the seller never checks between changes, or you are trusting the badge more than the inspection. Maintenance tip: check oil every other fill-up on 2.4 examples, and do not buy one that runs low between changes. Keep coolant and transmission fluid fresh too, because simple does not mean maintenance-free. The RAV4 belongs high on this list because the market knows Toyota, but many shoppers overpay for flashier versions, while the plain one does the same job with less drama. But the next SUV is old school, tougher than people remember, and completely unforgiving if rust has already won. Number 2. Isuzu Rodeo and Honda Passport, late 90s to early 2000s. The Isuzu Rodeo and Honda Passport have a problem that decides everything before the test drive: rust. Old-school truck SUVs can be tough, but rust decides whether toughness still matters. The Isuzu Rodeo and second-generation Honda Passport are body-on-frame SUVs from a time when utility still felt mechanical. The Honda badge fools some buyers, but this Passport is really tied to Isuzu hardware, and that is why you inspect it differently than a CR-V or Pilot. Look for late 90s to early 2000s V6 examples with clean records, working four-wheel drive, and light rust. Avoid anything with severe frame corrosion, no matter how cheap, shiny, or rare the seller calls it. This is where emotion gets expensive. A buyer sees the Honda badge or the old-school shape and starts picturing bad weather, dirt roads, and rugged utility. But if the frame is rotten, none of that matters. The dead badge issue is real. Isuzu left the American passenger market, and many buyers fear parts. The Passport version adds confusion because people expect Honda-style simplicity, then realize it is not that kind of Honda. But when the conditions are good, the hardware survives because it has body-on-frame construction, real four-wheel drive availability, and a simple utility layout that can handle rough roads better than soft crossovers. Prices run roughly $3,000 to $10,000, depending on rust, drivetrain, mileage, and region. That price only matters after the underside passes. Inspection begins underneath. Frame rust is the whole game. Check rear suspension link areas, frame rails, cross members, brake lines, fuel lines, body mounts, rocker panels, and rear spring areas. Then, test four-wheel drive engagement, transmission shifts, cooling system, axle leaks, steering play, and tire wear. A shiny body with a rotten frame is worthless. I do not care how clean the seats are. Street reality: these feel old, truckish, and thirsty. That is part of their charm and part of their cost. This is for someone who needs cheap, rugged utility for light hauling, bad weather, or dirt roads, and is willing to crawl underneath before talking price. Skip it if the frame is heavily rusted, the four-wheel drive does not work, or the seller tries to distract you with the badge, shine, or rarity. Maintenance tip: wash the underbody, treat rust early, and keep driveline fluids fresh. Rust prevention matters more than cosmetics. If rust has not won, a clean rodeo or passport can be smarter than people think. But number one is the weird Honda box that went from unwanted to cult favorite because the market finally understood it. Number 1. Honda Element, 2003 to 2008. The Honda Element is the SUV that proves the whole point of this list. The problem was never the hardware. The problem was the shape. When it was new, normal SUV buyers thought it looked too strange. Boxy styling, 4-seat layout, rear half doors, dog owner jokes, and camping box stereotypes kept mainstream buyers away. Then the market caught up. People finally realized the shape solved real problems. Look for 2003 to 2008 LX or EX trims. Stock examples: no severe rust, no water leaks, and no rough camping conversion hacked together with plywood and wishful thinking. The engine is Honda's 2.4-liter 4-cylinder, making about 166 horsepower in later years, with manual or automatic availability depending on trim. Cargo space behind the seats is useful, and maximum cargo room can reach the mid-70s in cubic feet, which is ridiculous for something with such a short footprint. This is the real-world reversal. Buyers mocked the shape, then years later started paying more because the hardware was Honda K-Series simple, the cabin was practical, the cargo shape was brilliant, and the owner community was huge. Now clean ones are getting expensive. Prices range from $5,000 to $15,000, depending on mileage, rust, and condition. That is the price shock. The Element used to be weird and cheap. Now it is weird, useful, and understood. Inspection needs to be serious. Check rust at rear suspension points, rear door seals, hatch leaks, seat folding hardware, air conditioning, suspension wear, engine mounts, transmission behavior, and valve service history. Also check the cargo floor for moisture and owner modifications, because Elements often lived with dogs, bikes, tools, camping gear, and homemade storage builds. Street reality: it is noisy, square, and not silent on the highway. The rear doors are weird, the seating is limited, and fuel economy is not tiny car good. But the shape is useful in a way most smooth crossovers are not. This is for someone who wants real utility, a practical cabin, Honda 4-cylinder logic, and does not care if the SUV looks strange. Skip it if there is severe rust, water leaks, rough homemade conversion work, neglected valve service, or transmission behavior that feels wrong. Maintenance tip: keep valves adjusted, fluids fresh, and fix leaks early. These engines last, but the ignored basics still win eventually. Why number 1? Because it proves the whole case. The market laughed at the shape, then years later realized the hardware and utility were real. The Element is the forgotten SUV that people finally understood after prices started climbing. If you find a clean one, inspect fast and negotiate with respect. Someone else probably knows what it is too. Buyer rule close. Do not buy the badge. Buy the hardware and the inspection. Forgotten SUVs are cheap for reasons, and some of those reasons are harmless. A dead badge can be harmless. Ugly styling can be harmless. A rental lot image can be harmless. A plain interior can be harmless. But rust, overheating, slipping transmissions, bad all-wheel drive systems, missing timing belt proof, and electrical warning lights are not harmless. For the GM crossovers, check coolant, intake seepage, transmission shifts, and front-end noise. For Ford family SUVs, check rust, transmission behavior, suspension wear, and all-wheel drive parts. For the Saturn Vue, treat timing belt proof like real money. For the Grand Vitara, check driveline fluids and four-wheel drive operation. For the Honda Element, check rust, leaks, valves, and transmission feel. For the Toyota RAV4, check oil use before you trust the badge. For the Isuzu Rodeo and Honda Passport, Crawl under the frame before you even talk price. The smart buyer does not say, "It is cheap, so I will risk it." The smart buyer says, "It is cheap because the market is scared, and I will find out whether the fear is real." That is how you win. You do not need the prettiest SUV. You need boring records, clean fluids, solid metal, and no mystery under the hood. One more rule matters here. Do not let a seller rush the inspection because the price looks attractive. Cheap SUVs attract emotional buyers who picture camping trips, winter roads, dogs, tools, and family errands before they verify the boring stuff. Slow down, start cold, drive long enough to get hot. Park on clean pavement and look for drips, scan for codes. Check every window, lock, fan speed, four-wheel drive button, hatch, and warning light. A forgotten SUV is only a bargain when the boring checks stay boring. If the inspection feels rushed, the answer is no. Real patience is cheaper than fixing somebody else's abandoned problem later anyway. Click the video on your screen next. We will show SUVs that look cheaper but hide painful repair bills. Subscribe for reliable picks and smarter buying.